In the late 60s and early 70s, comic books saw a significant drop in the sales department. Lack of innovation and somewhat comic book fatigue had settled in, and comic book publishers such as DC and Marvel Comics were looking for ways to boost their sales. What was the solution that they found? Well, 1976 is the year that saw the first ever crossover issue of Spider-Man vs. Superman, followed by similar pairings such as Batman vs. Hulk, X-Men and Teen Titans, and many more. Was this a successful idea? Yes, obviously yes. Jump forward to 2020, superhero genre is flourishing with a multitude of characters, Oscar-worthy storytelling, and groundbreaking visuals. In the recent years, the industry's main trick seems to have become doing large-scale crossovers. Most obvious example seems to be latest Avengers movies, which gathered around 60 superheroes on screen. Even TV shows are doing their own thing, with the latest Crisis on Infinite Earths, which not only crossed over between multiple TV shows, but also crossed between TV and movie universes. In fact, this may now have become the formula of success not only for superheroes, as many studios are now trying to replicate the success that Marvel had in the past 2 decades. Now, sure, some studios are better than others than handling it, like better than DC or Universal, although DC has been killing it on the small screen. But ultimately, crossovers can and do work, and they are normally the ones that attract most audiences by the sheer long-term build-up and hence more profit. After we have seen such epics as Avengers Endgame, one would have to ask, well, what's next? How can you possibly raise the bar after this movie? What scale and dimension do we have to go from here now? Well, some of you may have the same potential solution as me, a DC and Marvel crossover. Just imagine the possibilities. What if Superman took on Thor? Or what if Batman took on Iron Man? What about a team-up of Spider-Man and Flash? It is a known fact that some of the Marvel heroes are actually based on their DC counterparts, so surely it would be manageable to produce a story around similar characters. It's easy money for studio and enormous pleasure for fans, right? So, where is the crossover? To find out the answer, Mr. Feature would like to discuss some reasons for why the crossover has not happened yet, but also talk about how and when it could potentially happen. So, without further ado, let's delve in. Since Marvel Studios was purchased by Disney, it makes sense to talk about Disney as being the heroes' rights owner, not Marvel. Since Fox was the latest addition to Disney's collection, Marvel now has free access to pretty much all the major superheroes and villains, including X-Men, Fantastic Four, and all related characters. But there are a few important exceptions. Spider-Man is still owned by Sony, even though Disney has a deal in place with them, so technically by a stretch, they do have some control over Spider-Man. Universal Studios owns rights to Hulk 2 and Namor, but Disney is free to use both as long as they are not the main protagonists of their movies. There's also some kind of weird Netflix shenanigans rights going on, but Disney is still able to use any of the Defenders as long as they have nothing in common with the Netflix adaptations. So, in a nutshell, Marvel has access to by far most of their main characters. But do they even need to have everyone to make a crossover happen? Probably not, and I will come back to this a bit later on. With DC, things are significantly simpler, which is even more baffling for why they couldn't figure out a functioning universe. In fact, DC Comics are owned by DC Entertainment, which is a branch of Warner Brothers. That means that Warner Brothers is in complete control of all of its DC characters' arsenal. Now, here is a pickle. Say you have a movie that features Spider-Man and Batman. How do studios split the box office? Batman is a more bankable comic book character by far, but Spider-Man is much more profitable movie asset right now. How would they split the amount? Well, judging by the latest example with Spider-Man, it might prove rather extremely difficult to work out a deal. To bring Spider-Man into MCU, it took almost a year to come up with mutually satisfactory terms. The terms that will still have to be checked and renegotiated when necessary, As for example, recently in 2019, Sony almost seceded their deal with Disney over an argument in regards to the profit split. But consider that Marvel Studios is in Spider-Man's DNA. He is a perfect fit for the MCU universe, but to bring someone from a much darker, grounded DC universe would for sure provide extra challenge. With all this in mind, unless one studio owns all the rights, it just might prove too much of an effort to come up with a mutually satisfactory deal. Any superhero fan knows that both Marvel and DC have their own unique tone. While Marvel is generally colorful, more or less realistic and down-to-earth human-centered, although of course that's not always the case, DC is mostly set in dark, fantasy-like and very philosophical world. Naturally, a tonal conflict would occur should Spider-Man and Batman go for a beer, or Green Arrow and Hawkeye play darts at a bar. It would be a challenge to write a story that would encapsulate both what DC and Marvel heroes stand for, and then to visually deliver it. Now, of course, you could pick similar themed characters like Spider-Man and Flash, who are both known to be jokesters in their teams. But doesn't that massively eliminate all the awesome pairings that could be? I'm not saying it's impossible to find the golden ratio on screen, but it sure is one hell of a challenge the studios are just not keen on facing. Now, as Marvel has proven by its success, and DC and Universal by their failure, maintaining a several dozen movie franchise is an onerous task. What's even more challenging is to keep the lines clear as to which movie belongs to which universe. Fans are already finding it hard to understand in which universe Morbius would take place or the upcoming Batman trilogy. But why are we talking about franchises? Could there be just one crossover movie? Well, the thing is, creating a crossover between Marvel and DC would inevitably entail creating a franchise. Look how many movies it took to flesh out all the characters before Avengers Infinity War. And look what happened when you put together the heroes you were just introduced to. If Studio was able to do such a difficult task as a DC and Marvel crossover, they would want to tick as many boxes as possible. Stretching the story over several movies to focus more on the storytelling has proven to be a success every time. Because of this, the crossover would have to be more than one movie. But can they create a viable franchise? DC has not proved that it can. In fact, DC right now is heading into a completely different direction. After a monumental standalone Joker movie and an upcoming, apparently isolated from the rest of the movies, Batman trilogy. On the other hand, Marvel is doing more than fine with their fully established franchise, and since the purchase of Fox, are most likely insanely busy with finding the door to let X-Men and Fantastic Four in. All in all, it just doesn't seem like either of the studios are ready for a new, co-created franchise. One of the biggest deals in the movie business, and maybe in business overall, was Disney buying 20th Century Fox for $71 billion. Even for someone like Disney, this is a hefty fee. Now, there are two reasons why I brought up this deal in this video. The first and good reason is that it shows that Disney is potentially open to buying whole companies, even if it's for such a hefty fee. Now, of course, the only reason to buy Fox was not to acquire the rights to X-Men and Fantastic Four, but it was a significant one nevertheless, to make Marvel family whole again on screen. After all, this is something that fans have been calling for a very long time. Thus, potentially, Disney could buy Warner Bros. Studios, but as you can probably imagine, the price would be no less, and maybe even more than the one offered for Fox. Considering that Disney just emptied a massive portion of its treasury, they are most definitely not in the buying business right now. This is the reason number two though, because of the deal with Fox, it is unlikely that Disney would even begin the discussions to buy Warner Bros. In the next 5 to 10 years. However, potentially, this is completely possible in the future. Once they do purchase Warner Bros. Or all the rights for DC, doing a crossover on big screen would be a much more attractive opportunity. The only reason why 99% of the movies are released is money. Cinema industry is constantly looking for new and sustainable ways of getting a constant cash inflow. Coming back to franchises once again, building a storyline across dozens of movies is arguably the best clickbait that was ever created. And if we look at the highest grossing superhero movies, it's the all 4 Avengers movies. It is then reasonable to assume that a movie that has DC and Marvel characters in it would appeal to both DC and Marvel fandom, and thus, if not double, at least significantly expand its audience. If done well, an entire separate universe could be created, which would constantly bring audiences to the cinema, longing for more and making the big buck for Hollywood. Also, some people say that the budget of such movies would be ridiculous. Well, to that I say, it all depends on what kind of movie you are making. If you are doing a Civil War scale event between DC and Marvel, then sure, that would cost more than all Avatar's movies combined. I only assume they cost a lot because, I don't know, Cameron has been making them for 3 centuries now? But say you make a movie that would be a love child of Winter Soldier and Dark Knight. That for sure could be within a reasonable budget, while delivering a great thriller story and thus appealing to the fans. I believe that superhero genre is now in somewhat of an experimentation phase. We had multiple movies of the most popular comic book characters like Thor, Iron Man, Spider-Man, Captain America, Batman, Superman, and so on. But those are extremely well recognized characters whose story arcs have been fleshed out quite a lot by now. Studios therefore are trying to be more creative to keep surprising the audience by putting lesser known characters on both small and big screen. Most notably, we had such little gems recently as Doom Patrol, Swamp Thing, which for some goddamn reason was cancelled after first season, Joker Story, which is extremely unorthodox for a villain to have his own movie. We are now also having Morbius, She-Hulk, and Eternals in production. Now, sure, studios have taken risks that did not pay off, but mostly it seems that the viewers are just as interested in exploring the new as the studios. And thus, the experimentation phase. This is the short phase when the studios will identify new certain formulas that would work for the next 10 years or so, which is in Marvel's case, for example, would probably be bringing X-Men and Fantastic Four into the MCU. Therefore, such phase would be a great chance for both studios to consider a crossover. Superhero genre is at its highest, but also most stable peak right now, and I'm not sure if there would ever be more fitting conditions to explore such a monumental project.
Do it! Just do it!
In conclusion, I believe that expecting a Marvel and DC crossover in the near future is anything but realistic. Marvel is currently busy with integrating X-Men and Fantastic Four in their established MCU, which is clearly not going anywhere soon, whilst DC is trying their best to discover a new successful formula to put their superheroes on screen. Nevertheless, superhero genre is only entering its experimentation stage, where craziest ideas often turn out to be successful, and with more and more fans out there begging for a crossover, I believe that studios might soon consider starting a table discussion on a potential deal.
Many thanks for watching this video, and I do hope that you enjoyed it. Please let me know in the comments which other movies you would like to learn interesting facts about. Please make sure to support the channel if you like the content by clicking the like and subscribe button. More similar content to come. Thanks again, and see you in the next one.